Great. Thank you for joining us. This is Using Storytelling to Build a Culture of Inclusivity for UndocuCommunities at your campus. Our presenter today is Briselda Molina, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to her.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Briselda Molina. I use she, her, and ella pronouns, and I'm a career and academic advisor at University of Oregon. I'm very happy to be here with you today. This presentation will be about an overview of my experience as a undocumented and now DACA professional. I think it's important to talk about our stories in order to learn firsthand from our students' experiences, but also from our professionals, what happens when a student becomes a professional. So the picture in the background is actually my hats from graduations. I thought it would make it fun to include something like that. So with that being said, let's get started. And this is gonna be an interactive session. There will be a little bit of storytelling, and there will be some, where am I? Oh, there you go. This is the information session outline. There will be a little bit of storytelling, a little bit of background on who is an undocumented status student or professional, also DACA. So, and then after that, there will be a handout with a few scenarios that we can all reflect on and learn a little bit more through those. And then there will be a handout that you will all be receiving that you can take out with a few tips on how to be inclusive within your campus communities. Maybe I have to go back. Okay. So I use a lot of storytelling to build within educational tools. And when I do presentations, I'm a firm believer that storytelling is one of the best practices out there to get people to learn about different cultures, backgrounds, identities. Storytelling, as you can probably know, it's an ancient practice that has helped us to connect with our humanity and ancestors for a while. UndocuCommunities healed and make sense of their experiences when they are able to get it out to the world, and therefore, satisfy a sense of belonging and acceptance and be understood. When UndocuCommunities tell their immigrant stories, we offer an opportunity for learning and clarifying questions from first-hand source. Storytelling is an educational tool that can lead to creative solutions as well. Repetition through storytelling brings healing, and it gets the energy out into the world, and it opens, like I said, for new possibilities for success. UndocuCommunities have the potential to leverage grassroots action as well. As people learn about UndocuCommunities and Undocu experiences, it opens doors for collaboration and learning. One of the biggest reasons why I use storytelling is to help normalize this issue of immigration and immigration status. Breaking the silence and the stigma around immigration status is, in my personal opinion, the best way that we can to continue and create change and open new doors for positive change. Keep moving on. Here's a few statistics in Oregon. Now, this was before we named OWHE to GAIN. So these are only from Oregon, but I'm sure that the statistics are probably bigger outside of Oregon. But in here, 1 in 10 Oregon residents is an immigrant in 2018. This is the latest numbers that we have and that I could find because, census, and it's really hard to keep track of evidence, but this is what we have at the moment. Nearly 90,000 US citizens in Oregon live with at least one family member who is undocumented. And 29% of adults immigrants had a college degree in 2018. 21% had some college, 90% had high school diploma. 70% of immigrants have 10 or more years living in the US. And Oregon ranks number 19% in the US for numbers of DACA applicants by percentage of state population, and is closely following Texas and California. The last statistic is immigrants are interested in pursuing grad school in Oregon, and this is actually a grassroots movement. It's actually one of the ways how I was able to go to grad school as well, more in a little bit. So a few definitions on these wordings that I'll be using. Undocumented is defined by out of status, not currently protected by any legal category or immigration status in the US. A few facts: not legally able to work, travel outside of the US, can be deportable, vulnerable to deportation threats, not eligible for any federal benefits or most state aid, do pay, however, federal and state taxes. That is a big misunderstanding, but they do pay, and they can. They can get an Oregon license as of January 1st of 2021. That was a big win for the state of Oregon. And then might qualify for Oregon tuition equity. Documented or DACA status refers to deferred action for childhood arrivals. This is actually kind of how I was able to change from an undocumented status to a DACA status. In people under this status can work under employment authorization document, which is why I'm able to work at higher education or work legally. We can get an Oregon's license and travel, but we cannot travel outside of the US. They can, but it's not encouraged. Although there is a movement of travel abroad, if you are more interested, I'll be happy to answer questions about that at the end. But there is a way that students are being encouraged by nonprofits to travel out as a way to come in legally. More on that later. They are not eligible for financial aid or other social services, and they might qualify for Oregon tuition equity. This is just a short list of what DACA means, but I thought I'll give you a little bit of a nugget of understanding of what does this mean. Moving on with this, a little bit of this background, and now I'm gonna move on into my Undocu story. So I'm originally from Acapulco, Guerrero, which is in Mexico. My parents, my parents moved here about 15 or so plus years ago. The reason, like many other immigrants, my parents did not go to school. It's very hard in Mexico for them to go to school. They only had a third grade education. And my dad actually tried so many things. I remember him even getting his license to teach karate. And he taught for a while, but people weren't able to pay him. So he just got pretty desperate, and he saw the US as a land of opportunity. So he moved to the US, and then my mother followed after that, and then we follow after that. I had to learn how to like live in Oregon, coming from a very tropical place. I remember I couldn't really breathe. I thought I had asthma at some point because the change was so drastically. But I had to learn to accept that Oregon was my new home. My family was all here. I didn't really have any family back in Acapulco except my grandparents, who were very elderly. So I had to learn to just accept that this will be my new home and my new land. Which wasn't too bad for me because my family was here. I know that's not the case for some students or some communities. I had to make peace with being undocumented in DACA now. So the first time I learned that I was undocumented, and I'm sure this is probably a story that some of you working with this group of students have heard before, which is very common, but I learned as a senior in high school. When I moved here, I started as a junior at Mountain View High School in Bend, Oregon, which was back in 1998, and it was very, very, very white. I was the only Latina student walking through those halls, and it was very intimidating. I didn't speak any English. And just overall, I had to make it work because where else was I supposed to go? I learned through approaching my counselor and getting ready for college. That has been a big dream of mine, going to college and getting a degree since I was 6 years old back in Mexico. I saw that as I was like, if I'm gonna get out of poverty and change the legacy of my family, which comes from a poverty lineage, I have to go to college. So when I learned that, when Mrs. Kelly asked me like, hey, let's start filling out the FAFSA application. Where can you bring your social security number? And honestly, I had no idea what even that meant. And I was like, okay, it's like you go home and ask your parents to give you that so that we can start, working on this application. I went home and I asked my mother, and she told me then that we have been brought as undocumented and what that meant. It was very devastating for me. I remember being so mad at her because I was like, you are destroying, as a teenager, such a drama queen, but but I was like, I just can't believe you brought me like this. You knew my dream was always to go to college. How am I supposed to go to college? I just couldn't see beyond the pain that I was feeling and the disappointment. But eventually I went back and I spoke with Miss Kelly because I trusted her. She has been working with me since the beginning, and I felt comfortable, telling her, I don't have any documents. My parents brought me to the US without documents. Mrs. Kelly was very understanding. She actually arranged for a scholarship. At that particular time, there was an accident with a couple high school students. Unfortunately, they passed away, and their families were looking to provide a scholarship for a deserving student. And Mrs. Kelly advocated for me, and that's kind of how I was able to start community college over there, and Central Oregon Community College. And this was way back before 9/11, when there wasn't a lot of a stigma or rage around immigration. I can definitely feel the difference after 9/11, but back then I was able to register for classes and I was able to pay with that scholarship. At that point, I was like, I already knew that higher education would be a lonely road because that's kind of how it was for the first 2 years in high school. There wasn't really anybody who understood how it felt to be the only person, of color. While there were more students coming in during the last year, there wasn't really enough time to make connections. I wanted to fit. I spent a lot of time, trying to fit in high school. But at the end, every time I went to a classroom, I was the only person of color. So I kind of learned that. That was kind of training for me. When I got to COCC, or Central Oregon Community College, I already knew that it would be a lonely road, and I had learned to accept it. I also knew that I wasn't going to be graduating within, the traditional 4 years. It actually took me 10 years to earn my bachelor's degree, but I was okay with that because I was like, I know it's going to take me longer than anybody else because I have to work. I have to pay for school out of pocket. And I had to navigate the system by myself because my parents couldn't really support me with that. They were very supportive emotionally, and they were so, like, you can do this. What do you need? You can stay, you can live here at the house, which is very, expected. We don't really have children live with their parents as long as they can. And it's very much like a traditional way within Hispanic families. And my family was very traditional because we had just moved here. So they were kind of like, yeah, you're gonna stay here. We will provide everything. You just worry about working to pay for school. So I graduated, but then I wanted to go back to Mexico because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get employment here. And I raised about $8,000, which was I don't know, a lot. I thought it was a lot. I was like, I had spoken to people back in Mexico. I spoke to the University of Guanajuato, which actually the University of Oregon has a lot of connections with that university. But I was like, I can work there. I speak English now. I can probably get a good job in there. Maybe even like, as an assistant or something like that. But that particular year when I graduated, I met my future husband. He's a Peruvian man, and he was also a dreamer, not like without legal status, but a dreamer. Like he's like, you can go to school here. Why don't you try applying at the University of Oregon? You can definitely go in there and study what you want to study. I wanted to be a journalist. I love telling people stories and learning about other people. So he convinced me, I applied and I got accepted into the program, which made me really happy. But moving to the UO was another big challenge because it was the first time I was moving away from my parents. And my parents were not doing well. My dad was very physically abusing, my mother, and it was just not a good feeling leaving her alone there. Eventually they got divorced, but at that particular point, I felt so worried. Talking about, taking care of siblings, that's exactly what happened. I was going back almost every weekend just to check on my mom, check on my sisters, my brother, and make sure they were doing okay. Being the oldest definitely has its perks and its challenges. You end up definitely playing like the mom role. So I will definitely go back a lot. Wasn't focusing too much on my education, but I was getting passing grades, mainly because I was like, if I'm gonna be paying for these, I cannot be repeating any classes. I need to pass them. But it took me another 4 years to graduate. In this particular case, I had to be very, very strategic of how to raise money for a university, because the university is like 3 times more than community college. Thankfully, my husband, boyfriend then, started a business, and he's like, hey, why don't we open a spring kiosk at this Latina store here in Eugene, and you can sell phones in there, and then all the commission you can use it to pay for school. So I was like, oh, that would be really nice. And I have a background on selling phones from working back in Bend, and that's kind of what we did. He started purchasing phones and started selling it. Sprint was very hot back then, so people love Sprint phones. So I was selling them, and then that's kind of how I end up paying for my education at the UO. When I was in there, though, I was really suffering with like mental. My mental health was definitely taking a toll. Anytime somebody will ask me like, "Hey, where are you from?" Even that particular question would trigger like emotions in me. Where I'll be like, what are you asking me? Like, I wouldn't want to socialize with anyone. I would just go to my classes, go to work, go to my classes, go to work. And that didn't help with like, making connections, building relationships with professors, doing internships, learning more about, how to prepare for my career eventually. And I had to learn more about it to get that like fear away from me. And I was studying journalism, so I was learning all of these techniques on how to interview people, and I decided to just go incognito. And like, there was a student that was also leaving back then to Mexico because they couldn't pay out-of-state tuition, and I reached out to this student and I was like, "Hey, Eduardo, can you please help me?" I was like, I really want to find out where am I standing within this university, and I want to write about you. I want to write about your story. And find out more information about it this way. And he agreed, and then it was so great. It was my great chance of asking questions without being fearful. So I went to the office of the registrar. I interviewed all of these people, and I just asked them like if I was asking for the student just to learn, but it really was asking about for me. but I was like, hey, so can you, why is the student going back? What is the university standing on this? Can students actually get deported if you find out that they are undocumented? All of these questions. And of course, I didn't know this back then, but it was such a relief to know that institutions, higher education institutions cannot do that they're not ICE agents and they're not gonna deport you. And but at the same time, I was like, I also learned that, you have to be careful who you talk to. You always have to be balancing pros and cons. But that helped me a lot to be able to use, continue. And eventually I graduated. 4 years later, I graduated, and I got tired of, honestly, of hiding my identity, because I was like, if anybody knows, like, how do you get DACA status? This happened right after I graduated. Obama, has the deferred action for childhood arrivals, and I was able to apply just when I graduated. It was such a good timing, and I got it. But I always call DACA and DACA recipients A+ citizens, because in order to get that document, you have to have like the completely clean record. So I was like, if I have a completely clean record, pay my taxes and everything, I was like, why do I feel fearful? And I found out that it's actually like it's a fear that is also fed by our society, by the way we put energy into like this stigma, and silence perpetuates the stigma and shame around immigration status. And I didn't like that. And this is what you're seeing here is my first article that I wrote about myself as an immigrant. I did it for the moment at LCC, or Lane Community College, which was my first job that I was able to apply to with DACA status. I did financial aid, and I learned a lot about, just overall students and other students who were also like me with the DACA status or undocumented. Just getting this like, I call it a rite of passage. If I can identify, there's no like student development theory that talks about undocumented students or DACA students or just overall the immigrant experience. So I always used, in grad school, I used the LGBTQIA+ community, and I called it the rite of passage, because it's essentially mimicking almost the same feelings, where you have this fear, like, am I gonna come out, and what are people gonna say? What are they gonna think of me? And by getting over that and the relief that you feel when you are out, per se, like, it's so liberating. So this is kind of like the first time I started coming out. After that, I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna be fearful anymore, because I know there is other people out there who are undocumented, who are documented, and they need to hear that they can speak up, that this is their stories matter, that they're not doing anything wrong per se. And I started also advocating within my department. After that, I went back to grad school after working at LCC for 4 years. And then when I came back, I got hired as a career and academic advisor at the University of Oregon, ironically, at the same school that I study, the School of Journalism and Communication. And not much has changed. Our students are still, they're still not the support that they need for marginalized student communities, which is something I'm very passionate about, that I'm working on building more programming to build a sense of belonging for marginalized communities. So how would inclusivity looks like? This is a couple of things that we are doing over there that I'm leading on. Inclusivity looks like, recently the University of Oregon started the Financial Wellness Center, where we are teaching students how to take care of their finances and just overall, like, learn how to manage their finances, which is a big big educational gap that I always saw. And I reached out to the director and I was like, why don't we create financial wellness for UndocuCommunities? So the UndocuCommunities can also learn this information, but some of it, while it might be the same, some of them is really different with the challenges that they will encounter. And they really like that. So I started doing like teletalks and webinar series, short nuggets of information on how to, like, for example, apply for a tax ID number so that you can become maybe an independent contractor if you don't have documents, or how to seek for a community if you're a DACA professional. That is something that I'm definitely working on. And I'm very open to sharing my status with my colleagues. They all know I have DACA status. I'm trying to hopefully put an example for other DACA professionals within the institution. I honestly believe I'm not the only one. I want to, I definitely want to make sure that if there is community out there, that we find each other, that, you know, we get to talk to each other and just learn and build community. Time check, okay. When I get talking about this topic, it just lose track of time. So anyways, I also started trying to move this chat and I can move it second. So I also started, I hope you can you still see my screen? Okay. Yeah, okay. I'm just another way that I'm creating change is we started offering internships for students who got an internship but is unpaid. So we created the SOJC, or School of Journalism and Communication Internship Fund. We are mainly focusing on helping underrepresented students, and I help with the application language. I wanted to make sure that it was also inclusive, especially for undocumented and documented students. So keywords are definitely very important when you are building a new program. Like this one, for example, I was asked to review the language of this application, and I just included like FAFSA or ORSA will be one of the factors that they will need to assess need. If you are a undocumented or DACA student, you know what ORSA means. You're not really outing students, but they understand it. And if they don't understand it, we also added at the bottom, like, if you have a unique situation, please come see us. Here's a direct number. So different ways that we can definitely support students with without outing them. I know there's always this concern of like, oh, we don't want to out students, but at the same time, let's not disempower them. If they want to come out and share their story, let's not put more fear into them and being like, well, are you sure? Because you might end up in trouble, or maybe you will be, I don't know. I'm always big of like, if a student is empowered to share their story, then we should allow them to do it. Of course, we should inform them, because we don't want them to, you know, share their story without being informed of potential consequences. Like anything in life, there's always the pros and cons. I want to move into the next section. I have put together a steps to increase inclusivity for UndocuCommunities at your campus. And it's mainly like, what can I do in my own space to support UndocuCommunities? What can I do as part of a larger group in your campus? You will have access to that handout. I believe there will be a link, maybe? Is that what it was? Yeah. Okay.
Yep, one second. I'm getting it posted. There we go.
Thank you so much. So that way you can have something to take away. But the main point of this is just to help you and give you, they're not like too complicated, but I think it's good to have something that reminds you. Sometimes it's just like a reminder of what can we do. Maybe you're already doing this as part of your community on your campus. I thought about creating a few scenarios just to get you thinking about different scenarios that you might encounter and talk about them as a group. At this point, there is a link on the chat for the scenarios. We are gonna break into 5 rooms, and then the room that you're in will be the scenario you'll be picking. So there is 5 scenarios, 5 rooms. If I have number 1, then I'll do scenario number 1. Talk about the scenario, and then maybe for like 5 minutes, and then we can come back and just get a conversation started, and hopefully, you know, we'll be able to answer each other's questions, or I can just, you know, also chime in and answer if that's necessary. But there is a lot of wealth in this room, so let's just talk a little bit more about it. Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the activity? Great. Okay. I'm going to open the rooms. Okay.
All right. I think people are making it back now from the break room. Welcome back. I hope you had a great conversation. This is definitely, you know, a teaser. There is so many scenarios out there, so many factors that can change the overall response. But I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what are Dreamer students encountering. So if anybody else at this point would like to share with the group, please do so. Share a little bit about what the scenario that you had, what the scenario you had, and maybe a little bit about what you were talking about within your groups, possible solutions, or anything you want to add.
I can share.
Yeah.
In our group, our scenario was about a student who is working with financial aid, and the financial aid counselor says, yeah, just fill out your FAFSA and have your parents apply for a Parents Plus loan. And the student kind of clams up and ends the appointment and doesn't come back for more assistance. And so what are ways that that could have been handled differently? And in my role, what I've learned to do is, instead of saying this is your option, is asking the student, is that an option for you? You know, here's one way that you could do it. Is that an option for you? And if they're like, well, I don't know, then we can talk about what would make that an option or what wouldn't. But in my case, many students, they are already aware of what the options are for them. And so coming from this place of, you know, this is one way, is that a way for you? And if they say no, then we can skip to talking about other options, instead of making them feel like, oh, well, since that's not an option for you, then there's no way I can help you.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. That is a great approach. And you are definitely, many of Dreamer students already know you are right, but very informed because we have to. So I really appreciate your comment, and get the approach. Is that an option for you? I think that is a really good one. I want to be mindful of time. These scenarios you are welcome to use. You're welcome to talk more about it. Maybe you want to bring him to your team and, you know, talk about him. We have about a couple minutes left. I want to see if there is any additional questions that maybe you are itching to ask. I'm very open to responding to any of your concerns. Send me an email, or let's connect. I'm on LinkedIn. And I just wanna like applaud all of you, because we are in higher education because we care for all of our students. I almost call us like superheroes. They can transform people's lives. I know I'm here, sitting here speaking to you because I have people who cared about me throughout my whole educational journey, continue to care for me at this point, while I'm very open to sharing my story. I know that there are different levels of some people don't feel comfortable about doing it, but that's okay. And it's just working towards getting a little bit more of like the knowledge and breaking the stigma around immigration. That's going to help our students to feel more comfortable and reaching out for the resources that we need. And if there is any DACA professionals out there, please connect them with me, because I'm trying to find some community. And that is something that I'm really hoping that it can start happening. So anybody has any questions or you would like to add anything to the conversation? I know we're going a little bit over time. I can hang out for a couple more minutes if you have any questions you're itching to ask. Thank you so much for coming.